Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone. If you could take your seats, please. Those who are coming in could take your seats quickly, and if you could quieten down, we'll get underway. We're starting this session with a very special guest who's just here to my left and your right. You heard his wonderful homily yesterday through Jim's voice, and now you can hear his voice. I'd like to welcome Cardinal Blaise Cupich to say a few words to us.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? It's terrific to be here with you. I just have to apologize for being tardy. This closure of the Munich airport yesterday was inconvenience not only to me, but the people who were on the 200 flights that were canceled. Just because someone got through security and wasn't checked right, they had to close the place down, and it really was kind of a disaster. But I did finally make it, and I wanted to come to be with you. As I said in the homily yesterday, I have great admiration as I stand before you for the work that you do and for the contribution that you're making in this conference. It is, I think, so very important to be supportive of one another, but also to really take action, as I mentioned in the homily, to do all we can to build up people as an experience in human life where salvation happens, but also to be attentive to the poor. This morning I had Mass at noon at the Cathedral for an English-speaking group that's here. And as I was talking about the inspiration and the spontaneity of how poor people and those who have so little can sometimes inspire us, and pointing out to that young boy who gave his loaves and fishes as the example in the gospel, just as I got to that part and suggested to the people that we really need to follow that kind of example in our own life, to be attentive to how we can be surprised by the generosity of others, but also the impulses of generosity in our own hearts. Just at that moment, a little girl about 3 years old came walking down the main aisle, came up into the sanctuary, up to the pulpit where I was, and handed me a little coin for the collection. For she was so dear, and so I said to the people, "Do I need to say any more?" It was, fulfilled in our hearing. To have this kind of youthful, innocent spontaneity of someone who gave the little coin that she had in order to give witness to the gospel. And as I told Antonio Spadaro, this is not an example of the prosperity gospel. I just wanted to make sure that he understood that. I'll be back later at your break. I have to go give an interview now, but I'll be back to see you at the break time, and then I'll be with you the rest of the day for the afternoon conference as well as the banquet. But I did want to take this occasion to thank you and greet you.
Thank you, and I'm Yana Bennett from the University of Dayton, and on behalf of our network, and on behalf of Antonio Altiero, who signed this book, this is our latest edition with essays from people, many of whom are in the audience from all over the world, writing on Catholic ethics in the local church. So we wanted to give this as a token of our appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very grateful. Look forward to reading this, and we'll see you later.
Thank you very much, Cardinal Cupich, for being with us now and this evening as well. Welcome to our the third movement of this wonderful conference, where we're engaging in our summons to move forward. My name is Dan Fleming. I'm from Sydney, Australia, as you might have guessed from the accent. And we have a remarkable sixth plenary for you this afternoon, Networking for Social Impact. Have no fear about the after-lunch drowsiness. Our speakers are incredible, and you're going to be fully engaged for the next hour and a half or so. I'm going to introduce our speakers in a moment, but I wonder if you all noticed that in a group of such diverse and interesting theological ethicists, we've been able to come to a consensus on a highly specific universal moral norm, that of 15 minutes for every presentation. So we will be making sure that happens again this afternoon and have some time for questions as well. So I'm going to introduce our four speakers all at once, and then I'll ask our first speaker to come up and we'll follow the normal pattern. So first, Shawnee Marie Daniels-Sykes, PhD from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, USA. Currently, Shawnee is an Associate Professor of Theology and Ethics at Mount Mary University in Milwaukee. As the only African-American Catholic female bioethicist in the United States, she uses her background in biology and nursing with theological ethics to examine beginning, middle, and end-of-life issues at the intersection of race, class, and gender issues. Our second speaker is Sister Alison Munro, a Dominican sister of Oakford, a South African congregation. She was the director of the AIDS Office of the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference for 17 years, managing large programs responding to AIDS in the fields of prevention, home-based care, antiretroviral treatment, and the care of orphaned and vulnerable children. She co-edited Catholic Responses to AIDS in Southern Africa in 2014. Christine C. Menezes earned her PhD in theology at the St. Vincent School of Theology in the Philippines. She is the current coordinator of the Ecclesia of Women in Asia and has been volunteering as a sign language interpreter for deaf people for a decade. Her academic interests include post-structuralism, scripture and feminist, queer and deaf disability theology. And finally, Monsignor Francisco Nino Suar has studied in Bogota, Jerusalem, Rome, and Cambridge, has degrees in education, a master's in psychology and in sacred scripture, a doctorate in canon law, another doctorate in theology, and a postdoctoral fellowship in divinity. He is currently Associate General Secretary of the Latin American Catholic Bishops' Council, Vice Chancellor of the Theological and Pastoral Biblical Center for Latin America, Director of the Social School and of the Social Pastoral Observatory of Selam, Ordinary Professor of the Faculty of Theology of the Javarenia University, and member of the Theological Committee of the Colombian Bishops' Conference. Could you please join me now in welcoming our first speaker, Shawnee, to the stage.
Thank you. I am very pleased to be here to share a bit on the work of the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians of the United States, hereafter ACTUS, and the Black Catholic Theological Symposium, hereafter BCTS, given the many ways that these two learned societies have a history of networking for social impact. After briefly introducing the history of each of these academic societies, I will share some of the collaborative activities of these two groups. That is, as we are minoritized people of color, the word minoritize is a way of uncovering what is done to us, marginalizing, in the Theological Academy in the United States. Engage in Teologia en Conjunto, which is collaborative or joint theology, and colloquia or symposia, promulgate joint statements or endorse each other's statements that call for relationships of justice, love, and equality, while addressing the absurdities of political, social, racial justice, gender and class ecclesial oppressions. And 3, invite members of each group to be present at each other's meetings. And there are many other ways that we work jointly. I conclude my remarks by sharing the poem Democracy by a foremost Black American poet, author, social activist, playwright, and columnist from Joplin, Missouri, USA, the late Langston Hughes, 1902 to 1967. The United States is founded on a liberal democracy. Despite living in this democratic society, Latinx and Black Catholic theologians maintain that for many minoritized groups in the United States, there continues to be major social and political injustices when it comes to economic, race, class, gender, and religious concerns that inhibit right and just inclusion into a foundational democratic framework. ACTOS and the BCTS Network for Social Impact. Hughes' poem explicitly promotes our perpetual struggle for freedom in a democracy. In order to understand the importance of how ACTUS and the BCTS came into being, one must know a bit about their histories in relationship to the Catholic Church. In the wake of Vatican Council II, and then after the Second Conference of Latin American Bishops in Medellin, Colombia, in 1968, a new adjournamento took root in the consciousness of the Latin American Church, which gave rise to two new themes. First, the centrality of context, the social, political, and cultural, as a starting point for theological reflection. And second, the theme of justice and the option for the poor as a hermeneutical test or lens for doing theology. With regards to Actus, the contributions of Virgilio Alessandro are essential to consider here. A priest and a 1960 religious leader, Virgilio Alessandro was encouraged by the then Archbishop Robert Lucy of San Antonio, Texas, USA, to pursue catechetical and later theological studies for the purpose of forming Latinx communities of faith, as well as for ecclesial and public leadership roles. Alessandro was the first contemporary Latino thinker who explicitly articulated a U.S. Latinx theology. By the late 1970s, Gustavo Gutierrez, Teología de Liberación, Theology of Liberation, sowed the seeds for praxis-based theology that impacted all of Latin America and the Caribbean by awakening commitments to uplifting the inherent dignity, subjectivity, and agency of the marginalized through an emphasis on God's preferential option for the poor. On U.S. soil, the needs, gifts, and daily realities of Latinx Catholics were often overlooked. Adhering to the new themes from the Adjournamento previously mentioned, theologians knew there needed to be unwavering and critical responses to the threats against human dignity. In January of 1988, the founding group, including Virgilio Alessandro, Maria Pilar Aquino, Orlando Espín, Roberto Gorsueto, among others, instituted the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians in the United States, ACTUS. The results or impact of Vatican II and the two new themes from the Adjournamento from the Medellin Conference positively impacted or influenced Black Catholic theologians too. The late Father Thaddeus Posey, OFM Capuchin, historical theologian, founded the BCTS in 1978 and initially was sponsored by the National Black Clergy Caucus. Their first meeting was held in Baltimore, Maryland, USA, at the Oblate Sisters of Providence, Mother House. 33 Black Catholic theologians and doctoral students gathered to focus on the distinct experiences of being Black in the Catholic Church. That distinct experience was racism, otherwise known as white supremacist extremism. This symposium valorized Black responses to racism and other unnecessary or senseless forms of human suffering, oppression, and/or death. Details from the proceedings from that first meeting are in a book called Theology, A Portrait in Black. This proved to be an important meeting to examine, interrogate, and envision a Black Catholic theology in light of the overlooked theological resources from African American spiritual, psychological, social, and cultural productions and experiences. Further, it is important to note that both Gustavo Gutierrez's work, as mentioned previously, and that of the late James Cone in advancing a Black theology in 1969 demonstrated an extremely fruitful hallmark for the ongoing development of a Black theology in general and a Black Catholic theology in particular. Over the last 40 years, the BCTS has sought to share with the wider Catholic Church and society our unique Black experiences and gifts. However, like Latinx and Mexican American peoples, Black Catholic experiences have often been overlooked and marginalized in the Catholic Church and society. Theologian M. Sean Copeland argues that, quote, white people living in the United States, for them, the entanglement of Christianity with African chattel slavery and anti-Black racism form a deep and confusing paradox, unquote. Whites too often perceive Black people as inferior, shiftless, dumb, and dangerous. In a similar way, Latinx and Mexican American people are judged to be illegal aliens, interlopers, dirty, worthless, and lazy. Hence, both groups struggle and continue to struggle against these dehumanizing attitudes that deny the imago Dei present in them. This social sin of human defacement calls into practice a teologia in conjunto to struggle against forces of evil. Over the years, Actus and BCTS have networked together for social impact. They have met jointly for 3 colloquio in 1995 in New York City at St. John's University, in 2006 in San Antonio, Texas, to engage in the practice of teologia in conjunto, which involved the sharing of papers back and forth in partners as each member developed his or her papers. And most recently, in 2017, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Actus and BCTS members met together for several days to address their joint concerns surrounding policies of detention and incarceration that disproportionately affect communities of color. Theme: to set the captives free, the colloquium's speakers criticized as immoral the emergence of the prison industrialized complex and the immigration complex, in which powerful, well-connected individuals have benefited tremendously from incarcerating people of color, particularly African Americans, Latinx, and Mexican American women, men, and children. Furthermore, over this past year, Actus and BCTS have promulgated joint statements or endorsed statements from each other's. On September 4, 2017, quote, regarding the most recent surge in racist hate crimes in the United States, both groups of theologians critiqued vehemently the deep, troubling displays of hate speech, neo-Nazi and white supremacist ideologies, the pardoning of former Arizona Sheriff Joe Espario, and the battle over sanctuary cities in Texas. On June 21st, 2018, ACTUS and BCTS issued another joint statement on the treatment of families in the U.S.-Mexican border. In the strongest terms, the two groups of theologians denounced the Trump administration's recent decision to criminalize asylum seekers, to increase detention and deportation of unauthorized residents, and to separate migrant children from their parents. They also decried the use of children for political gain while inflicting pain on families. And there are the completed statements for these endorsements and statements on the websites of the BCTS and ACTUS. There have been other substantive collaborative events between ACTUS and BCTS. Jeremy Cruz, a member of ACTUS, and I shared the enlaces after a meeting in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 2015. And those enlaces included the summaries and the recommendations of papers presented during the time that ACTUS members met. And there are other illustrations of Teologio in Conjunto. So in closing, the poem Democracy from the late Langston Hughes. Democracy will not come to this year nor ever through compromise and fear. I have as much right as any other fellow has to stand on my 2 feet and own the land. I tire so of hearing people say, let things take their course. Tomorrow is another day. I do not need my freedom when I am dead. I cannot live on tomorrow's bread. Freedom is a strong seed planted in great need. I live here too. I want freedom just like you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shoni. Sister Allison.
Good afternoon, everybody. The SACBC AIDS Office was established as a direct response by the bishops of Southern Africa to AIDS, a crisis spiraling out of control in the general population. The response at diocesan level was overwhelming as parishes, religious congregations, and retired nursing professionals offered care and support to people through education about the modes of transmission of HIV and ways to prevent infection, about home-based care to the sick and dying, and about the care of orphans and vulnerable children. It was not until 2004 that the Church, and indeed South Africa, was in a position to offer antiretroviral treatment as a means of arresting the progress of HIV to full-blown AIDS to death. By then, too, it was clear that the Church programs needed the support of other professionals from various disciplines in the provision of high-quality clinical services. After all, we're the Church, we're not specifically a clinical program. People with financial means had been able to access treatment long before the general public and marginalized groups of people. The SACBC, the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference, joined advocacy networks calling for treatment for all. But it took a ruling by the Constitutional Court before the country began providing the life-prolonging drugs. In time, South Africa developed the biggest antiretroviral treatment program in the world. Despite the gains, the spread of HIV continues today. Within the SACBC program, screening people for tuberculosis and HIV counseling and testing aim to promote early detection and treatment of TB and HIV, and to work with communities towards the prevention of further transmission of both. As we know, the attention of the world was recently captured by the rescue of Thai schoolboys from an underground cave. The rescue, against almost all odds, was underpinned by collaboration and cooperation between international experts and local officials, highlighting what joint efforts can achieve, an illustration of what is possible among people. Networking is about creating relationships with partners with a similar mission and goals, or with government departments or providers of critical resources and services. This way, maximum value for resources for beneficiaries is leveraged. Clearly, the SACBC AIDS Office, itself not a direct service provider, needed from the onset to work with other people. These included parishioners and volunteers in dioceses and parishes, themselves part of local healthcare, social, and education networks. There was also collaboration with national, provincial, and district organizations as policies and the implementation of programs were refined. The collaboration, I have to say, hasn't always been easy, but is critical if the church is to be a competent role player in the provision of services to marginalized people. Donor agencies and their partner organizations also implement their programs through the SACBC network. Often in the past, these donors, various government agencies, and the public took issue with the church's perceived position on the use of condoms. Please note the word perceived, not necessarily the church's position, which was challenging for good working relationships with these organizations. Over time, though, relationships strengthened as the church programs do deliver good services very effectively, if differently from those of other organizations. Sometimes it's simply about having assumptions challenged and addressed. Our own experience, on the other hand, has shown that some church projects in their turn do resist collaboration with others, not sufficiently understanding that, in fact, they cannot manage on their own. The signs of the times and the challenges they raise. South Africa is a fragile democracy, struggling with unemployment, a skills shortage, an educational divide, a healthcare crisis, major urbanization, a foreign national population perceived to be taking resources not intended for them. Large-scale corruption enriches those in power, denies the poor access to resources, and impedes development. The gap between the rich and the poor continues to widen. When local communities and trade unions take to the streets to make their demands known, protests often become violent. Over the past year, there have been major protests and labor strikes in the healthcare sector across several provinces of the country. While major resources are allocated today to HIV and AIDS in South Africa, unlike in the past, not sufficient, nonetheless, it is today managed as a chronic disease, differently from what was the case when treatment first became available. However, the lifestyle causes of HIV infection cannot be managed by governments or indeed the church. People need to take responsibility also for their own lives. Nonetheless, healthcare workers and church workers are often fatigued. At the same time, they recognize that local circumstances listed in that long collection of Signs of the Times often fuel the poor choices people make about even their own health. AIDS is not the foremost issue in their minds. Signs of hope and best practice. The church and the AIDS office as part of the church doesn't go away, even when other agencies sometimes do. It aims at building bridges, closing gaps as far as possible between what the various government departments provide and what is needed in local communities. SACBA's office programs aim to facilitate good communication to families around disclosure issues, educating people to know their HIV status, and supporting those who need treatment. The numbers of people tested are increased with the engagement of several partner organizations through campaigns to reach entire families, not just people who access clinic services. That's when they try and catch the men who don't go to clinics. Buy-in from local people is a key to furthering successful interventions. And so we celebrate positive choices people make around lifestyles. Partner organizations are the donor agencies that make funding available for the programs, such as the United States PEPFAR program and the Global Fund, which themselves are in bilateral agreements with the government. There are various Catholic and other NGOs as sources of funding for specific programs. In the Orphan and Vulnerable Children program, partner organizations include local Department of Health clinics and various service organizations commissioned to do screening and testing or provide assistance with referrals. And the Department of Social Development enables beneficiaries to access other services. Some of the challenges that are faced. The attitudes and actions of people either facilitate or impede networking and ultimately the provision of services. Decreasing funding is a reality to be faced when donors focus their attention elsewhere. Overcrowding at clinics, inadequate recording and documentation, challenges and changes among church personnel who get moved, working with people who are insufficiently invested in bringing services to people. The success, on the other hand, of the various interventions is dependent on the people working at local level in their communities with whom we need to work. And some of the positive experiences include the donor organizations being converted by what they see, the successful delivery of services, the addressing of the issues of stigma and discrimination, improved communication between children and their guardians, program statistics showing improved numbers of people being researched, church personnel offering various forms of support. the fact that the SACBC AIDS Office has itself become increasingly recognized as an organization. And when beneficiaries recognize that they are partners in their own service, in the services that they are receiving. We need, however, also to keep our own house in order. So within the SACBC AIDS Office, there is the recognition that collaboration is needed among the staff and with the partner communities they have, and that's sometimes also quite a challenge. We try to model for others with whom we work that no one is in this for his or her own benefit. The common good is key. Consistent monitoring of programs helps everyone to establish which interventions are working and what needs changing. In conclusion, HIV and AIDS has given us a particular insight into the sufferings of people, the challenges they face, the choices they have made and continue to make, the results of the circumstances in which they find themselves. It has also shown us the generosity of spirit of those who have responded through their own actions towards others, individuals, and groups. More people than one may have ever expected have been drawn into networks of service, committed in various ways to the education and support of those affected by AIDS. Solidarity has taken on a new meaning. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Alison. Christine.
Good afternoon. I hope you can see me. I'm too short. So let me go straight to my point. I was tasked to share something about Ecclesia of Women in Asia. So conceived 16 years ago, the Ecclesia of Women in Asia, or EWA, to this date is the only continental organization of Catholic women theologians in the world. Thank you. Well, most of our members are from the academe. Some belong to religious congregations, while others are actively involved in their local churches and grassroots works. EWA is a group of Catholic Asian feminists who are passionate and determined to provide a space for voices to be of the silenced, to be heard and reverberate their sentiments. But how do we afford a platform for the silenced, for them to be recognized? First, EWA's trust is to be a venue for the silenced. Our concerns are beyond ecclesial matters. EWA is open to discuss and engage the continental and global issues. EWA does this through her conferences, her gatherings, where issues that needs attention and lobbying are exposed, discussed, heard, commented, analyzed, and reflected upon. To see other dimensions of the issue that we tackle, we likewise invite and listen to women who are from other sectors of the society and who are directly involved in the issues that we're tackling. We listen to their stories from ground zero. Having said this, we do not confine EWA amongst ourselves, such as restricting only to Catholic women feminists. We also welcome Asian women feminists from other Christian denominations and other religions as guests who share similar concerns who desire to effect a positive paradigm shift in the society. In addition, given to the complexity of social issues, there is a need to weave together to create and solidify alliances. Thus, IWA continues to seek, reach out, and join other groups such as the CTEWC and the INSECT, or International Network of Societies for Catholic Theology. We believe that through proper connection with other groups that share a similar vision, we could provide a larger platform or space for the silenced or even the unheard, or to articulate their stories and bring this into a conversation. Second, to be relevant as well as accessible to the public, we translate our conference proceeding into anthologies. Given that most of her members are from the academe, one might perceive that IWA is mainly an academic sphere. However, we try to avoid a sort of self-talk. We endeavor that women's voices be heard through our doing of theology and the theological reflections where we use a language that is comprehensible and accessible. We believe that self-talking affects isolation of ourselves from the reality and away from the public. Further, IWA's engagement on contemporary issues is interdisciplinary. It is essential for IWA to remain relevant, contextual, and language plays a role in connectivity. I'm sorry, translators, but I have to add this. Aside from her published anthologies, IWA's engagement in public theology is also online. One way of extending the conversation beyond Asia is IWA's video conferencing with the help or support of CTEWC, which is part of our program during our gathering. This is an opportunity to not only invite some theological institutions in the US, in Europe, in Africa, but also involve them, specifically the faculty and students, in the Q&A segment of the video conferencing. In addition, we provide a space for conversation in the cyberspace. We have a website and a relatively new Facebook page where the public can engage in a conversation with us regarding our conference's theme and its related issues. The DG World is one way to create connectivity and conversation. Indeed, the cyberspace is a promising place to meet and greet, so to speak, people who share the same sentiments about the current situations in society, who would like to raise ethical questions on certain issues, post thought-provoking challenges, or even suggest responses as a resolution on pressing issues. Third, engaging the women in discourses and conversation through our conferences has actually facilitated a local IWA in Myanmar, which is the Myanmar Ecclesia of Women in Asia, and this happened 2005, where women members are active on grassroots works. IWA also facilitated personal activism and advocacy. One of our members from Thailand is involved in women's rights activism, especially on migrants and human trafficking. She is also part of the Talitakum Thailand. Another member from India cascades IWA's mission through women's rights activism, especially in FABC, a male congregate. She lobbied for the active participation of women in the said federation. Another IWA member from Malaysia provides a space for people who are discriminated due to their different gender orientation. One of our members from the Philippines advocates animal rights and initiated a group comprised of faculty and students in the university she's affiliated with. Another member, I believe you know her, has devoted her time in moving forward towards transformation through active participation and contribution in women's circles, conferences, and publishing critical books and articles on essential issues. Well, yours truly is actively involved in a deaf community of which I am a member. Yes, you heard it right. I am a deaf member of that community. Well, I may not be physically deaf, but I'm culturally deaf, according to them. I usually, every Sunday, volunteer for a sign language during the Mass. Okay. In doing theology, with my engagement with them, I have to be honest with you, it's quite transformative in both ways. My engagement with them somehow does not only enhance my theology or my doing of theology, but it also enriched my humanity in a way. I don't want to let this pass because my realization with my engagement with the deaf people is this, is that deafness will be my future. It's a possibility that in the future I will be deaf. It's not only my possibility, but it's also your possibility. So we're not alone in this area. So be happy, we're not alone. So I must say that it enriched my doing of theology and intensified my advocacy, not only for them, but furthering my involvement to other gender group activities and participations. Now, IWA facilitated this. Advocacy and activism facilitated by IWA. Indeed, networking for social impact is more effective if we learn to welcome like-minded people and groups for collaboration and coalition in order to perform better and be effective. IWA hopes that her engagement on certain issues and to the public would at least gradually effect change. She does this first by reminding herself that she has to welcome and listen to others who are silenced. Likewise, she welcomes those who share similar aspirations and works for the socially excluded. Second, remind ourselves to avoid self-talking by being relevant, inclusive, and accessible. And this we do by using language that is down to earth, so as not to isolate ourselves from reality and from the public. Third, IWA believes that we must fulfill a prophetic task, that is, to be a social catalyst. Thus, this can happen if we converge in both the association level and the personal advocacy and activism. In the end, IWA goes back to the basic, which is to listen to the narratives of women, children, and even the groaning of the earth, and all those who are voiceless or silenced in our society. To do so, she keeps abreast to new challenges, issues, and concerns, which she can bring to the floor for discussions, exposition, conversation, and thus paves the way to hear the voices of the silence. It is our endeavor to make theology effective and affective by making an affirmative difference. Thus, this means that IWA's way of doing theology in public is one that connects, collaborates, cooperates, challenges, critiques, creates, and cares, as attested by the work done by her women. Through the years, IWA has learned, and still learning, to listen, welcome varied voices, which aids her to infuse, intensify, and amplify the voices of the silenced in a positive theology that engages the public online and offline. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Christine. Monsignor Nino Swa.
I have some news for you. Good news are that we are almost at the end. Bad news are that my paper has 10 points. So when I arrive to the 9th point, you will know that bad news are becoming good news. The Latin American Bishops' Council, CELAM, as an example of networking for social impact. First, bishops do make communion in America and the Caribbean to encourage and assist both reflection and pastoral action. Nearly 1,500 bishops and 22 episcopal conferences benefit from this body, which has 7 departments: ecclesial communion and dialogue, mission and spirituality, vocation and ministries, family, life and youth, culture and education, justice and solidarity, communication and press. One institute dedicated to the formation of pastoral agents through the biblical school, the theological school, and the social school. On this last one depends the social pastoral observatory. The CELAM has also the best library that exists in the post-conciliar pastoral field in Latin America, and the publication center whose texts have marked the course of priestly formation and the ecclesial action in this part of America. Each of the departments and schools has a team of advisors through specialists in their area and a bishop's commission in which the 4 geographic regions are represented: Southern Cone, Bolivarian countries, Central America and Mexico, and Antilles and the Caribbean. Every 4 years, the Bishops' Assembly changed the board, which has the duty of making a global plan for that term. With the perspective of these 63 years of life, the CELAM emerges as a clear example of networking in order to transform the social reality with the values of the gospel. Second, the Christian name of networking is communion. It is clear that the Catholic Church exists in and from the particular churches, which are mainly the dioceses, in which it is truly present and realizes the Church of Christ, one, saint, Catholic, and apostolic. But in many cases, communities, parishes, and dioceses close on themselves show the church like a sect or like a Presbyterian or Episcopalian group. Throughout these 6 decades of service to communion, the CELAM has demolished walls, opened horizons, sat everyone down at the table of dialogue, building bridges within the church and towards the world. In this sense, the purpose of the last global plan is to promote, in communion with the Episcopal conferences of Latin America and the Caribbean, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, an outgoing missionary church, poor for the poor, through pastoral conversion, in dialogue with the world, to announce with joy Jesus Christ, full life for all peoples. That is networking. And the Christian name of networking is communion, real communion, effective communion, if you want to add, but communion. Third, the family name of our networking is Catholicity. The new perspectives that have emerged from the 80 strategic programs of this pastoral plan, from the numerous meetings, from the sharing of successful experiences, from learning from mistakes, and from the contribution of publications, have extended the limits of pastoral knowledge of particular churches in Latin America and the Caribbean by opening the sources of the wealth of Catholicity. And in a complementary way, in a process that becomes clear and evident in the current pontificate of Pope Francis, the CELAM has helped the Latin American and Caribbean ecclesial wealth to enrich the Catholicity of the universal church. 4, our only purpose is to serve. The CELAM is not an organization that belongs to the hierarchical structure of the church. It is a structured organism, but not a structure that is above the dioceses or the Episcopal conferences. Neither is a control entity of the Holy See, or a tool to standardize the ecclesial realities. The CELAM is a council which from its origins has been binding not only by the force of authority, but by its spirit of service, training bishops, priests, and lay people, promoting communication, studying problems of common interest, offering guidelines for pastoral action, bringing advice and other programs that are required, are the way the CELAM serve. 5, we work with an attitude of subsidiarity. Subsidiarity means that every entity of a higher order has to give subsidium, has to support the promotion and development of the most local entities. The Islam arose when there were only a few Episcopal conferences, and now that ecclesial structure is found in every country. The Islam has given rise or has favored the emergence of numerous organisms and experiences in various fields: religion life, priestly formation, computer techniques, historical research, reality analysis, pastoral planning, and practically in every pastoral field. Many of these organisms and experiences have grown, have taken on a life of their own, or have disappeared when they have fulfilled their mission. The Islam has helped the Latin American and Caribbean Church in its process of growth and maturation, and the Islam itself has grown and maturated, constantly redefining the meaning of his being and its acting. 6. The affective is the effective. The history of the Islam has its roots in the founding of the Pio Latin American College in Rome, in the celebration in the same city of the Latin American Plenary Council more than a century ago. In the same city, more than 1 century ago, and in other events and contexts that allowed the emergence of and consolidation of strong ties of friendship between bishops of different countries. That is why it can be said that the Islam is nourished with the sap of collegial affection of the pastors and the growing of knowledge of believers who find in an increasingly globalized world the opportunity to strengthen their fraternal bonds in the exchange of ecclesial and pastoral experiences. In networking, it is clear that fraternal affection is a catalyst for unthinkable transformations, and the lack of such affection or the existence of disaffected persons is the greatest obstacle to the realization of large-scale projects. 7. The richness of the differences. The previous point, affection, does not mean that everything is rosy and that working together is an easy process. Quite the opposite. It is not only true that everything worthwhile in life is difficult, but also that where there is human interaction, there are difficulties and conflicts. In all these years, there have been tensions, struggles, problems, different conceptions and different ways of understanding the world, the church, the priorities of the moment. And without saying that every conflict is good or that it is impossible to avoid it, the history of the Islam allows us to see the richness of the differences, not only in the ideological field, because left and right are not given in black and white without nuances, because both depend on the place from which you look at, because we are all left in some things and right in others, and because almost always the one who starts in the left ends on the right, and vice versa. What is undeniable is that networking requires an ever-increasing qualification in what today are called soft skills, and what in the strictest biblical language is called merciful love. 8. Knowing reality. Reality is more powerful than ideas. Only direct contact with reality changes the heart of people. In these last decades, the church has undergone a radical transformation, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, from a church that expected everyone to come to her to a church on the way out, in the words of Pope Francis. In that ecclesial exit, many accidents have arisen. Mundanization, secularism, and other dangerous and numerous isms have always been on the lookout, like the risk of walking on the razor's edge, from social commitment to the temptation of political power, from partisan identification to confinement in the sacristies, from the recourse to social sciences to the absolutation of the ideological tools. But beyond this constant risk, the work of the Selam allows us to discover a church that is closer, more incarnate, more sensitive, more sacramental. It's not just about knowing data or statistics. Putting your feet on the ground helps to speak as equals, to see things from the perspective of the other, to understand the thirst with which the other drinks. Today, in Latin American and Caribbean church knows itself and its surroundings better and makes an explicit and constant effort to look critically and mercifully at the reality that surrounds her and to understand the changing dynamics of social processes. 9, discerning the signs of times. In the tripartite scheme that is traditionally known as the Latin American method, see, judge, act, the second moment corresponds to discernment. Discernment is understood as a second moment only in the context of a methodological precision, not in the order of a stage, chronologically subsequent to the knowledge of reality and preceding action itself. In the history of the Selam, this discernment is linked to the biblical category of the sign of times. That means that the believer and the church look at the world, the social realities, the historical processes from a perspective of faith. From this perspective, they try to tune in with God's project for humanity and for creation, to understand their own mission in each geographical context and in each historical moment. And with that believing, identity, discernment is exercised in conjunction with other realities that are not necessarily believers, by their social, academic, philanthropic, or otherwise, in order to face modern challenges that range from a secularist culture until an institutionalized injustice. These signs of times are the cries of God in history, which require attentive eyes and ears to be perceived and heard. The convening of the next synod of bishops on the Amazon and the calling of an integral ecology is just one example of these processes of discernment in which the Selam has played a leading role. 10. Geopolitics of hope and transformative leadership. Again, synchronically articulated with the knowledge of reality and with the discernment of believers, the church discovers herself in the world with a transforming, renovating, and revolutionary vocation. The believer does not understand history as a random happening of events, but as a salvific project. God has a loving plan for the world and for humanity, and has given the church the mission of announcing it, being both a sacrament and an instrument of his project. In conclusion, in Latin America and the Caribbean live approximately 40% of the Catholics of the world. Almost all the population there is Christian, mainly Catholics. However, that is currently the most unequal region on the face of the earth, and that is a challenge that exceeds an individual or isolated claim. There is much that the church has done to transform this unhuman reality, because Latin America land has been watered with the blood of countless men and women, through martyrs of faith and justice, to prophets who have announced the universal brotherhood and who have denounced oppression, corruption, and opulence. In this martyrial and prophetic journey, the Selam has articulated an ecclesial network to promote dialogue from Rio Grande in the north of Mexico to the Patagonia in the south of Argentina and Chile, from the Pacific to the Atlantic and the Caribbean. In the Selam, native peoples have found an identity, space, and a voice to proclaim their history and their values. Afro-descendants and Euro-descendants, indigenous people, mestizos and mulattoes, proclaiming Guarani, Spanish, Mapuche, Creole, French, Quechua, Mayan, Portuguese, Aymara, Nahuatl, and many other languages and dialects, their own culture and their worldviews. Tiny island, giant cities, passing through jungle or desert regions, face the novelties and change of an increasingly global world. But this same world, plural and diverse, represent a possibility of solidarity and communion, an opportunity of living the gospel of the world in a network and integrative our efforts. what the Selam has done during these decades and what the Selam intends to do in the years to come is networking, because the Christian name of networking is communion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monsignor Nino Soir. We have 20 minutes for questions. We're going to end just 5 minutes before our scheduled time for some announcements. So could I invite you to put your hands up, and could I remind you of the other inviolable moral norm here, that you keep your questions short and that you name yourself, let us know who you are, and address a speaker specifically too.
My name is Anselm Getwa from Tanzania. My question is addressed to, if I pronounce well, Shone. Yeah. I don't know in which ways do you find that Latin and Afro-Americans, theologians, are discriminated. So will you try to help me to explain how do you find the Latin Americans and Afro-Americans are discriminated, theologians?
Are you asking, how do I find Latin American and African American theologians? I didn't hear the last sentence. Discriminated. In our society in the United States, we have a normative situation, a normativity of whiteness. And many times you have Latino or Mexican American, Latinx, or Mexican Americans who have various shades of skin color, more lighter, more browner, and darker. The normativity of whiteness is what is looked at in terms of superiority. The brownness of the skin color is a difference to the normative whiteness. And so in many ways, people see that who have been, I guess, brainwashed to think about the fact that if you are dark skinned, you're different. And if you're different, there's something wrong with you and that you don't belong in this environment. Now, I'm saying it in a very simplistic way. There are other stereotypes and myths that have been ingrained in the mindset of many, not only in the United States, but throughout the globe, about dark-skinned people. And so that really, the normativity of whiteness in so many cases yields difference or a negative attitude towards difference for someone who is not white. And so that's one aspect of discrimination, racial discrimination.
Sì, parlo in italiano, sono Salito del sud del Brasile. Se ho capito bene, ieri è stato detto che Trump è stato eletto piuttosto per una questione culturale che... No, riparto allora. No, ieri, se ho capito bene, ieri è stato detto che Trump è stato eletto piuttosto per una questione culturale che economica. Lei ha parlato un po' di questo rapporto tra i teologi neri e dopo i teologi che vanno avanti tutti insieme. Se ho capito bene, la società nordamericana, quando ha eletto Trump, era metà-metà. Questo nazionalismo che viene fuori, guardando da lontano, se si capisce bene, come inciderà davanti al vostro lavoro teologico di portare avanti questo essere insieme e, come ha finito il compagno che ha parlato ieri, non una nazione americana grande, ma a portata di mano di tutti. Come viene questo scontro? Un nazionalismo che va avanti e una teologia che cerca di portare avanti la dignità delle persone come un insieme.
Andrea.
the question is to you, Shawnee, it is about the American situation and the vote to Donald Trump and the black support to Trump, and how it is possible to think about the future when there is such a complex situation concerning race, if we think of the current political situation.
Thank you. You have to, first of all, think that African Americans or black people in the United States are not a monolithic group, all right? So there are various degradations of education, of wealth, of who's in and who's out. The race issue in the United States has an extensive history. You can even go back to sacred scripture and see that there have been race issues in sacred scripture, especially in terms of individuals who are different. And so in dealing with the race issue in the United States, there is such a need for even someone like Donald Trump to be called on his racism, if you will. Even though he may not hear it or may not believe it, everyone who is sensitive to the issue of his racism needs to not be silent around that. I think Trump's administration and his slogan about making America great again is a code word or code phrase for make America white again. And so for people who are not sensitive to his platform of marginalization and did not pay attention to that even during his year and a half or so of campaigning, they missed the boat in some very significant ways. And so our race problem will continue to be a race problem. Trump's administration is a backlash, a white lash to the Obama administration. And so whether or not people are consciously aware of how Trump even got elected, and even if people of African descent voted for Trump, there still is, it doesn't make it right. And there still is much work to do in terms of racial solidarity and dealing with the conflicts that racism basically does in terms of keeping us divided as a country, as the United States of America. So there's a long ways to go. We're not finished yet. And in many ways, I feel that Trump's administration is dismantling a lot of the civil rights and voting rights things, for example, that have been put into place over the last 50-something years.
I am Churchai from Thailand. Just update you the news about the boy rescued from the cave. They are become stronger, well, and they are popular. So I'm afraid of his future because they'll be the victim of the press. We should change their life. My question addresses to Alison, from South Africa. To fight against HIV/AIDS, prevention is better than treatment. Everyone agree that. In my country, Thailand, as a religious order working with HIV/AIDS, we have centers, and we do palliative care, prevention, network. In Southeast Asia, I think, talking about Thailand, we are proud of that. Not of me, but the church that are doing there. We find the difficulty to implement the way of prevention. We apply the ABC A is abstinence, B is faithful, and C is, that.
Chirachai, is there a question?
Uh-huh.
A question?
Yeah. The question is, we find very difficulty to use this ABC, even in the case of very extreme. Even in the morning, we occupy during the day, we occupy the patient, but during the night, they are free. So for us, my question is, in your country, what is the strategy for prevention of the HIV/AIDS? And another question is
We might just take the one question.
Okay, the one question around what do we do around prevention and how ABC is very difficult. ABC is very difficult because people don't think ABC when they get themselves involved in what becomes dangerous activity. So what is actually happening in South Africa, there are still programs obviously trying to address particularly the youth around not getting involved in unsafe practices. But the biggest form of prevention is now treatment. I guess not only in South Africa, but in various world programs. Because when people are on treatment, they do not transmit the virus to their partners. Now that might sound like a second-class alternative or a second-class success to the real thing of prevention, but we also live in the real world. And it's taken a lot of people a long time to realize that there's nothing simple like saying ABC and expecting people to follow it. Thank you.
Benedict from Nigeria. My question is directed to you, Sister Allison. You did indicate and highlighted that a change in lifestyle is a very important way to prevent HIV infection. But your office, what are you doing to a kind of encourage a change in the body politic? Because it's not only the biological bodies of our people that are sick, but the entire continent because of the socio-economic and political situation in Africa. What is your office doing to encourage good life, good government, and promotion of justice? And secondly, HIV... Okay, only one question. Thank you.
There was obviously not sufficient time to go into the detail of all the programs, but the programs that are run through the AIDS office and the partner organizations in the dioceses and parishes relate to doing education with children, with youth, with the guardians and parents of the children around the kind of changes they might need to make, or the things they should not start in the first place, all of that kind of thing around prevention. So there's a lot of education that is going on. However, I did list a long list of social ills that the country is facing. And when you don't have a roof over your head, or you don't go to school, or you don't get employment or whatever, HIV is not necessarily at the top of your list of things that needs to be addressed. It's very difficult for the AIDS office on its own to address all the social ills of the country and indeed of the continent and perhaps of the world, because many of those social issues, from what I've heard here over the last couple of days, are in fact all over the world.
So we're going to take 2 questions in a row here and one over there, and then we'll see what's possible.
Francis Armada from Indonesia. I just want to know your opinion upon my humble proposal regarding the beautiful two-day plenary sessions, including this morning. Networking for social impact. I think listening to the presentation of Charles Curran, it is not enough to determine what is right and what is wrong, but we need to do something to change. What do you think if I propose that maybe not you, but the body of the CTEWC to create somehow like a Wikipedia of ethics? Let's educate society. Let's educate politicians. Because we in Indonesia, we suffer a lot of the politician corrupt, very corrupt. Also, I guess also in other world. But I think it is important that this networking should be sustainable and also beneficial to the ordinary people, including the politicians, including maybe Trump as well. Thank you.
Jeremy Cruz from the United States. I have a concern about models of networking that can function as a kind of brain drain or leadership drain from marginalized communities up into networks that are national or even international. And so I guess my question is mostly directed to those who are outside of the US context. I'm wondering if you have examples of kinds of networking at maybe national or regional or international levels that breathes life and resources and vivifies leadership, academics, et cetera, who are from marginalized groups, and I'm thinking particularly of indigenous leadership, indigenous church leadership, Afro-diasporic leadership, networking in ways that breathe life into local networks that are often struggling rather than pulling up those leaders into national or international levels. Pulling them up can be helpful, but other times it functions to create a collapse of leadership at the local level. And so I'm wondering if you have any positive examples of that kind of network happening.
Lawrence Pedregosa from the Philippines. I have a particular question to Monsignor Francisco Nino. And a while ago, you mentioned that the Christian name for networking is communion. But using Zygmunt Bauman's presupposition, and this is, I will explain, a communion or a community is something that you're born into, and you don't choose the members in that community. There can be good people, bad people, sane people, crazy people, but you're in the community. But in a network, you get to choose people. No? The practical example is, for example, well, the word networking is very, it's in the internet. No? Just like in Facebook. You add the friend, if somebody adds you and you don't like him, then you don't like him. Isn't it? Yeah, that's the case. That's the case of networking. And what Bauman is saying is that you don't choose the community that you're in, the members inside the community. Even if you transfer to another community, you don't get to choose the members in there. But in a network, you choose, and you can choose to unfriend. I hope so the question is, how do you reconcile those two perspectives, or those two concepts, network and the community, based on those premises? So thank you. I hope the question is not that crazy enough.
We have 2 minutes left, so Monsignor, would you like to answer that directly, and then the rest of the panel might like to respond to that second question there.
Okay, I think that in every step of your life, you can choose people, you can reject people. In every community and in every work. Networking is also a possibility to integrate people, even if you don't like that people or that organization or that institution. Networking is not only to an action to do with people that you like. No, there are many organizations that you don't like, but they are useful. So I think that that is the real work of building community, even in networking.
Christine or Alison, do you want to comment on the other question, which was about examples from your context of community working?
Yes, EWA's way of cultivating leadership is actually from the ground. From our biennial conferences, it is, well, those conferences are actually ways to propel, to look for leadership from the ground. And so that's basically how we do our network, because we believe that if we just stay within in the air, the thin air, change will not happen. So change must happen from the ground.
Maybe just to add on here that similarly to what Christine has just said, there's a lot of that kind of thing going on also in the South African setup. What is sometimes disheartening is that people move out of the Catholic networks and are snapped up elsewhere because they've become so good at what they're doing, and then it's like the church organizations have to start the process all over again. However, given the skills shortage, the difficulties we have in general, we believe we are offering something to the country, so there's definitely something to be said for that. I'm not sure if I understood the first question that was related to networking, but there's definitely harm that is done when imposition comes from the outside, whether that be a donor agency, some other group that says this is the way you have to do certain things. So there's definitely a no-no around that. But I would also agree with Monsignor that it is necessary sometimes to network with people you don't like or with people you don't normally choose to work for the common good and for the benefit of the beneficiaries.
Folks, would you please, oh, Shawnee? Jim, is it okay? Yeah, okay, good. Sorry.
There have been many lessons learned in terms of grassroots organizations coming forward and bringing around social transformation in our United States of America, for example. I think of the legacy of the Civil Rights Movement, led by Martin Luther King amidst many others, a nonviolent movement for social change. I think of even President Obama's election through nickels and dimes through social media. Not only was he able to have one term, he had a second term. And really his grassroots organization was really awesome. And so that allowed him to finish up a second term. I think of the Me Too movement. I also think of the Black Lives Matter movements. And there are many other community organizers in the United States that are doing some really good work for social change. My focus in my life is always a nonviolent social resistance. And in many cases with many of these movements that I talked about, they also were influenced by a lot of violence. A lot of people get killed and have gotten caught or killed. Thank you.
Thank you, Shawnee. And would you please join me in thanking our wonderful panel again. And please stay behind for just a moment. Jim's got just a short little announcement.
So I'm coming here on the very goodwill that exists in this conference, very goodwill. But I'm also coming in, if you will, for an interruption. And it's to give you, I was asked by our planning committee to speak because I am a priest. And so in a particular way, I'm speaking to fellow priests, but also to share this with everyone. You may have noticed about 2 minutes before I didn't notice, I was in the sacristy,
and Andrea Vicini didn't notice, or else there would have been an interruption right in the beginning of the liturgy. But the liturgy was preceded by 5 or 6 women being ousted from the second pew to accommodate albed priest. And that image really is compelling. It's an image that captures, I think, the unfortunate ordinary life of our church. And so I want to be able to raise that up with a few comments to assure you that we're very sorry that it happened. I want to apologize on behalf of CTEWC that happened. But also to tell you that we need to share what we're learning, and also to assure you that we will continue to raise this up as the years go on. Give you an image. The United States, following Shawnee's remarkable comments, you know, the image of how many African Americans, blacks, were taken away from sitting in a restaurant by sitting at a counter, a luncheon counter, and they were removed from sitting there. Or if they were sitting in a certain part of the bus, being told that that was not their place. So for 5 or 6 women to be told to get out of the pew, you know, you have to think. They weren't allowed in the sanctuary. They were taken out of the pews. I mean, what type of church are we imagining when we do that? And I'm not simply talking about the person who did that. I'm also talking about the priest who then sat down there. And I'm also talking about that no priest intervened. This is not an issue for women to address. It's about the conduct of priests. And we have to acknowledge that that has to change. That's just not acceptable. Pope Francis talks a great deal about priesthood as servant leadership. What happened yesterday was privilege. We may call it sacred order, but not in God's order. Not when you remove people from their pews so that priests can sit. Servant, so-called priest. I think that we need to reflect on that. We need to see that there have been things said here, and as Charlie Curran said yesterday, we're called to act, not just speak. And I told Tina I was going to be quoting her, but remember, Tina had that intervention yesterday. Tina Beattie got up and said, I just want to say to men, if there's no woman in the room, leave it so that she can enter. Yesterday, only a few hours after that, as we were gathering to worship, the women were removed, not from the sanctuary, but from the pews. What would have been the next step? So this is a call to my brother priest, that to be a priest and to be a cleric are two separate things. Yesterday was clericalism. We're called to servant priesthood. Thank you. One thing you should know, that when Darko came here, I talked with him about it. and he apologized. In the midst of everything going on and we talked about it, and I actually spoke to the cardinal about it, who knows dog. This is a clerical thing. There were plenty of African women there, African men, Indian women, Indian men, Eastern European women and men who were really offended by what happened yesterday. This is not a cultural thing. This is a clerical thing. And we're trying to assure you that we, as a network, have to call on one another for what this ministry that we all are called to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. We now break for afternoon tea.